I grew up in the meditation tradition, so for me it was natural to see how I could use it to help people lessen their suffering. Mindfulness is really a very simple way of looking after yourself, but it is not easy. It's simple, but not easy. And what I was looking for, because I worked with people with intellectual disabilities all my life, was something that I could use to something small, like shifting the mind a little bit. Just the way we look at the world, just a tad. And if I could shift the mind a little bit, it'll have this huge impact on their lives. I was trained in applied behavior analysis, in clinical psychology, and psychopharmacology. In my early days, I used to sort of work with drug treatments, behavioral treatments. But they're really very effective, but they're not effective enough to give people independence. Is this making sense? You know, with people with intellectual disabilities, they already have a cognitive problem, and giving them medication slows them down even further. So I was looking for something that could have the same effect, but without slowing them down. And when about 20 years ago, a mother emailed me and said, my son has Prader-Willi syndrome, he's a teenager, I want him to live by himself, but his eating is a problem. How can he help me? And when I looked at the literature, there wasn't really anything effective for helping individuals with Prader-Willi syndrome to control their eating by themselves. As Jillian was saying, if you lock the cupboards or put a lock on the refrigerator door, it certainly helps you not to eat because you cannot get to it. But that's a slightly different thing from being able to go into the kitchen, see the foods, and walk away without grabbing it. So this mother was asking me, how could I move the mind of her son from locked door cabinets to being able to live in the community by himself? I hadn't a clue. I just did not know what to do or say to the mother. I didn't want to say that, well, I just cannot help you because my whole life has been built around helping people. So what I did was to take mindfulness as a personal practice and see if I could change it in such a way that I could help this young man to take care of himself without overeating. He was 50 pounds overweight. He had great difficulty controlling himself. He was aggressive when they stopped him from eating. He was destructive. He had the usual sort of signs and symptoms of behavioral problems that some children with Prader-Willi syndrome have. So I set about working through several variations of a mindfulness-based health wellness program until I was able to perfect something that helped him. Now he is able to live in the community, and he's been there for about 4 years now by himself, and is able to control his weight within the regular BMI, which is between 20 and 25, which is where most of us are at. So he is not overweight, he's not obese. He's able to have self-determination in terms of his own shopping, having his own apartment, living with apartment mates. And then people asked me, well, my child with Prader-Willi syndrome is very aggressive and destructive. What can you do about that? So we had been using what's called meditation of the soles of the feet, an informal mindfulness practice that we had developed for another young man who had psychiatric and mental illness, mental deficiency problems. He was sort of functioning at the mild level of intellectual functioning. And he wanted to leave the psychiatric hospital where he had been for many years. And he sort of asked me, well, what can you do to help me live by myself? So I had developed this very informal mindfulness practice called meditation in the soles of the feet. Basically, it is an emotion regulation problem. Our children with intellectual disabilities, with Prader-Willi syndrome, Williams syndrome, Ray's syndrome, all of these, they are not able to regulate their emotions properly. And this emotion regulation problem causes them great difficulty in life. So my thinking was, well, mindfulness is about regulating your emotions. How to have awareness and attention, and given your awareness of where you are, what you're doing, and then being able to accept it, and then change your mind about them. You'd be able to take your mind from a very highly emotional state to a lower emotional state where you can think more clearly and then decide on a skillful way of doing things. Basically, it's like moving from a reactive response to a responsive, thoughtful response. Is this making sense? How to slow your mind down and to make a response that is commensurate with a good judgment. So we tried mindfulness using soles of the feet, and we presented it at a conference that Lauren had asked me to do. And after that, we got a deluge of emails from parents. And since then, what we've been trying to do is to think like a parent. I myself have grandchildren, so I've been thinking about all the ways in which our children face the world today, and they have more than one problem at a time. Children with Prader-Willi syndrome have an eating problem. They also have related disruptive behavior, aggressive behavior problems. So I could come up with one technique for controlling aggressive behavior, another one for eating, and another one for something else. And my thinking was, most parents and children wouldn't be able to do that. It'll stress them out even more. Behavior programs, when I was using them, did just that. We'd write them a behavior plan, and parents would find it very hard to implement it, and it'll stress them out even more. So what we've been doing over the last 10 years or so is to think about one single program that you can use for both eating disorders and aggressive behaviors. That the child, once the child learns this one technique, he can apply it across different things. This goes counter to our behavioral training, where we actually look at one thing at a time. It goes counter to medicine in the sense that there's no magic bullet. You cannot give a drug for weight reduction and it takes care of everything else. But I was thinking in mindfulness, because the entire problem seems to be, in terms of behavioral anyway, emotion regulation, I could do that. And tomorrow, I hope to show you some new data that we haven't published yet that show that adolescents with Prader-Willi syndrome can learn informal ways, mindfulness ways, by which they can control the eating and the aggressive behavior.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the pilot study that's going on right now?
Yes, we have a pilot study in Australia, and this is a e-health study, meaning you can do it on the web. And this is based at the University of Sydney, and they're using mindfulness and soles of the feet to teach parents and their children how to take care of their aggressive behaviors. And the initial results are just coming in. And I'll just read you, I asked my team to send me some notes, and they say that it is still early days, so it'll be a while before we have the final results. However, anecdotally, the mindfulness is being very well received by mothers. One has started sleeping well for the first time in years. Another is using beginner's mind, which is part of our training, to address her obvious feelings of stress when her daughter enters the room. And a third mother is finding particularly useful in helping her to remain calm during daily school homework. And her son is responding positively as well. I'm pleased, this is the researcher saying, I'm pleased that in only 2 sessions, people can take it on board and provide clear examples of how they're applying mindfulness in their daily lives with enthusiasm. So it seems like even with telehealth, which we do a lot, we can teach parents, and typically it is the mothers because they're available more. We teach the mindfulness to the mothers, then they teach it to the children. And many of these things that we teach the mothers doesn't take very long to teach.
It's very short, yes.
They're very short, but it takes a lot of time to practice.
Yes.
Like anything else, like you're swimming, the coach teaches you how to swim, but it's the practice that gets you there. So mindfulness is the same. I can teach you guys, the mothers here and the fathers, how to use soles of the feet in about 10 minutes. It is that easy. But to practice it, it'll take you a little while longer. So the things we're trying to come up with in mindfulness are short, they're brief, they're easy, they're simple, but they're not easy. You have to practice.
I really appreciate that, the idea of something that is short and easy, because I think as parents, we all have so much that we're doing with our children, and certainly I've had the feeling of, one more thing could just topple the whole house of cards. So doing something short that's relatively easy but does require practice, I think can be very helpful. Do you want to talk a little bit about whether this might be useful for younger children even before they start to have some of these struggles?
We've been doing a very long-term study with mothers of children with intellectual disabilities, with autism spectrum disorder in this case. We started at the age of 4, mainly because that's when the diagnosis is kind of firm. And then we have been teaching them mindfulness before the kids get into aggressive, disruptive behaviors. And what we are finding is when we teach parents as young, whose children are as young as 4 years old, the trajectory of the children's behavior goes in a positive direction compared to those who don't get mindfulness training and end up getting into aggressive behavior. So what we're finding is that the earlier parents can learn mindfulness techniques, the better it is for their families. It makes them whole. Obviously, it's not the solution for everybody because some people find it hard to meditate, which is basically sort of focusing on your breath for about 20 minutes a day. We think that you can teach meditation to young children pretty well, pretty easily. My granddaughter was 2. She was 2 years old when she asked to be taught meditation because her brother was doing it. And I just didn't know how to do it, but eventually I noticed that she liked lotus flower. You know lotus? It sort of blooms with the sun and then it settles again in the evening. So she liked lotus, and I showed her some videos of lotus opening up and closing. So I said to my granddaughter, I said, look, this is the lotus flower opening and closing. And she laughed and she said, oh, Granddad, you're silly, I know that. And I said, okay, why don't you just breathe when it opens so that Your breathing will open this for you. So this is the breathing in, breathing out. Breathing in, breathing out. So really, this is called the Lotus breathing mindfulness exercise. So what we do, we sit with my granddaughter, we read her a book in the evening before bed, and we then do this Lotus breathing, and she breathes with it, and then after a while she's taken over, she can breathe with herself doing it, and now she's just meditating. She's 2. So you can begin pretty early. Once the children get the hang of this breath, then you're able to say, when they're getting upset, why don't you breathe? Then the child breathes. When the child breathes, it calms them down. And when it calms them down, they're able to make a more reasonable judgment. Is this making sense? So with parents, what we find is we teach the parents to do the breathing themselves. We build it up from a minute or 2 to 20 minutes a day. And if parents are able to focus on their breath, and we'll cover some of this tomorrow, then by the end of 8 weeks of this kind of breathing, focus on the breathing, they have new neural networks in the brain. We can show you some pictures of the brain before and after 8 weeks where the brain changes are very evident.
Yes, I was going to ask about that research. So anybody who's talked to me over the last few years knows that caregiver stress and the challenges of being a caregiver and how important it is for us to take care of ourselves during this journey is kind of a top priority for me, and that's one of the reasons why I've gotten very interested in mindfulness. And can you talk a little bit about why? Susan said we could have a few more minutes. Good. Talk a little bit why it's important for parents to take care of themselves and how that actually helps our children.
Well, think about this. When you're upset, your reasoning is not quite right. You do things when you're upset that you regret later, right? You may say something to your child or to your spouse or to your other children that in hindsight you should say to yourself, I shouldn't have said that. I really didn't mean it. I was just upset. I was just angry because I'm stressed. I'm burnt out. I love my child, but there's only so much compassion that's left in me. This thinking has been driving us for the last 30 or 40 years. What we find is that if we can reduce parental stress, then parents are in a better position to handle their child and themselves better. So what we've been doing, and I'll show you some new data tomorrow with parents of children with Prader-Willi syndrome. What we've been doing, we've taken 2 groups of parents with Prader-Willi syndrome, and for one group, we've been teaching mindfulness of the breath. And it's basically, your body breathes by itself, but what we teach you is how to observe your breath for 20 minutes a day. And for the other group, they do whatever we do, right? You with me so far? And then we compare the stress level of the parents who have been doing mindfulness against those who haven't been doing mindfulness. And we collect the data every 10 weeks. And tomorrow we'll show you that if you've been meditating, if you've been watching your breath, your stress level keeps coming down every 10 weeks. In 10 weeks, you can see a clinical change, a statistical and clinical change where the parents report that they're not stressed as much. In 20 weeks, they feel great. In other studies, what we have been doing is to look at what happens to the interaction between the parent and the child when the parent's stress goes down. Or what we do is we videotape parents and children playing in a play situation. And we can show you almost by the second how the behavior of the parent changes from something negative to something really positive when they've been meditating and the stress has come down. We can show you how their compassion goes back up. We can show you that their burnout disappears. It's not the solution for everything, but it does help the parents a lot in terms of being able to provide loving kindness and to deliver any of the programs they have, regardless of what it is. If they have a cognitive behavioral program, or if they're simply giving medicine, they're able to do it better because they're less stressed. And when they're less stressed, the results of these therapies that they're providing is better. So whatever you're doing, it just makes it better. It's like 3M. It makes it better.